about the language, the first language and the second language. So what is this first language and the second language? What is their differences? So let's dive into our topic. So our first language, that's the language we absorb like sponge from birth. So like baby babbling the words that the older individual says. It's our mother tongue. The language we hear spoken around us from day one. It's instinctive, almost magical, the way we pick up sound patterns and meaning. So, this process is incredibly rapid. We're practically language ninjas as babies, soaking up vocabulary and grammar at an astonishing pace. It's natural, unconscious process driven by our innate ability to learn language. So, do you understand, guys? Do you understand my point about the first language? So like what I have said, the first language is an unconscious learning. So now, let's talk about our second language. So, if the first language is an unconscious learning process, while the second language is a conscious choice or learning process. We decide to learn a new language often to connect with different cultures, different individuals, or when we are traveling, so we want to know their language in that particular place or for professional reason. So, the learning process for our second language is different. It's often slower, more deliberate, and requires conscious effort. We study grammar rules, memorize vocabulary, and practice speaking. The speed of learning varies greatly depending on factors like our learning style, the language itself, and the amount of exposure we have it. So another example of learning a second language, so if we have a Muslim friend, if you are a Tagalog speaker and you have a Muslim or English speaker friend, so if you want to communicate with them effectively, so you will strive to learn their language. So to sum up everything, our first language is an inheritance. It's not a choice. It's simply part of who we are. We don't get to pick our language or first language, but our language too. That's our adventure. We choose which language to learn, and that choice reflects our interests and goals. So while both language 1 and language 2 acquisition are incredible feats of the human brain, they're fundamentally different journey. One is natural rapid immersion and the other is deliberate, often challenging. What I mean is the language 2, but incredibly rewarding adventure, because if you knew a new language, you can communicate effectively with other people or to the people where you want to communicate with. So that's all for my topic. So the next reporter is Riley Rodriguez. So Riley Rodriguez will discuss to you the factors of difference for the first and second language. Thank you for listening.
Good day everyone, I'm Grace Rodriguez. So now I'm going to discuss about factors of difference for the first language. First language is super easy compared to learning one later in life. This is because of a few things working together. How your brain works when you're young, your personality, your culture, and how much you want to communicate. First, your brain is incredibly adaptable when you're young, especially before age 6. It easily adjusts to the patterns and structures of languages or language. You're surrounded by people talking, and you learn by listening and not copying, not by studying rules. This is why babies can learn their first language so quickly. Their brains are naturally wired to pick up language. Your personality also makes a difference. Some kids are outgoing and love to chat, while others are more quiet. This affects how quickly they start speaking, but everyone learns their first language. A shy child might take a little longer to speak confidently, but they still learn their native language perfectly. Culture is another big factor. Your first language is connected to your family and where you live. It's the language of your home, your friends, and your community. It shapes your view of the world and how you interact with others. Finally, a young children naturally want to talk and connect with people. This desire to understand and be understood is a powerful motivator for learning. It's different from learning a second language later on, where you might need extra motivation to study. In short, learning your first language is easy and effective because of how your brain works, your personality, your background, and your natural desire to communicate. This all working together. And that's all. Thank you. And now Miss Joanna Capito will explain the factors of difference for the second language.
Everyone, I am Joanna Capito from Bsed English. I will be discussing to you about the second language, the factors of second language. These factors I will identify the differences between the second language and the first language. So let's proceed with the report. So, in the first language and second language, there are many factors in that languages. In second languages, it included the age of factors of the second language is the age. Why the age? Because during 6 years old children who are proficient in their first language are already capable in learning the second language, but in adult have the difficulty to learn second language because they already accustomed or used to in their native language. And the second factors is the personality. Why it affects the personality of the languages? Because in second languages, how will you be able to learn the second languages, or you will be in a state of slow progress in learning that second language? Because if you have a personality of being an introvert person, if you are an introvert person, you have the disadvantage to learn faster the second language than the extrovert person. The third one is the culture. Sometimes, for instance, in culture, if you are already learning a second language, sometimes other people unable to recognize what culture you are already in, because of the language you are already using. Sometimes the first language is already putting aside sometimes because you are already using or practicing the second languages you are using, that affects the perspective of other people on what culture you are already in. The last three factors, which for me is the important things in learning the second languages, is the motivation. Without motivation, you are not going to learn the second languages if you have no motivation. Motivation will give a person a faster progress to learn a second language by having that motivation in his or herself. To sum up, second language is also important in communication. In language, you will have a very big advantages in communicating with other people who have different native languages. By learning their languages, which you are going to use to communicate with them, will affect all of you. And by the second language that you are using, you will be able to communicate with other people and will have an effective communication with others. So that's all for my topic, the second languages. Thank you.
So, good day class. So, my name is Jacob Brian Alberto. So, I'm going to discuss about the native language, mother tongue language, and the foreign language. So, what is native language? Native language is the first language that you learn when you are a baby. It's the language that you naturally pick up when your parents, family, or other people surround you. While growing up, you didn't have to study it in school. It just came naturally because you heard it every day. For example, if you grow up in a home where everyone is speaking English, then English is your native language. But if your parents speak Spanish at home, then Spanish would be your native language. So some people even have two native language if they grow up using both equally. Your native language is usually ones you are most comfortable with to use, read, and understand and write. So it's different from a second language, which is language you learn later, like in school. So now we will move forward to the mother tongue. The mother tongue language. Mother tongue language is the first language you learn as a child, usually from your parents or family. It's the language that you use grow up speaking at home, schools, or before you even start in school. For example, if your family speaks Tagalog at home and you learn it naturally as a baby, then Tagalog is your mother tongue language. Even later, you will learn English at school and becomes fluent in it. First, still, your language is the Tagalog. Still, mother tongue language. Sometimes, mother tongue and native language mean the same thing, but in some cases, a person's mother tongue language might not be their strongest language, especially if they grow up speaking a different language outside the home. So moving forward, so the next is the foreign language. The foreign language is a language that is not commonly spoken in your country or not your first language. It is the language that you have to learn because you didn't grow up speaking in it. Example, if you live in the US and learn Japanese in school, then the Japanese is a foreign language to you. So basically, a foreign language is any language that is not native to them. Even in school, it is not the first language. It depends on the place where you live or to your personality.
Good day everyone, my name is April May Salazar. So what is the difference between native language, mother tongue, and foreign language? So native language is the language a person learns from birth in their home environment. It's the language they are most fluent in and use naturally. While mother tongue is often used interchangeably with native language, but can also refer to a language a person is most proficient in, even if they learn it later in life. While foreign language, on the other hand, is any language that is not a person's native language. It's a language they learn after birth, typically through formal education or immersion. So, for example, a person born and raised in the Philippines whose native language is Filipino, but who learned English in school and is now equally fluent in both. So, might consider Filipino is their native language and English is their mother tongue.
I am Mariana Aliari, the presenter for Diachronic and Synchronic approaches. First, let's define synchronic analysis. This approach studies a language or phenomenon at a specific moment in time, without considering historical changes. Think of it like taking a snapshot of language as it exists today. For instance, if we analyze how English is spoken in 2024 without looking at its evolution, that's synchronic approach. On the other hand, diachronic analysis examines how language or phenomenon changes over time. It's like watching a time-lapse of history unfolding. For example, if we study how English evolved from Old English to modern English, that's diachronic approach. Here's a quick comparison. Synchronic analysis focuses on a single point in time, while diachronic analysis examines changes over time. Both are crucial for understanding language and history. So, these concepts are not just theoretical, They are applied in many fields, such as in linguistics for studying dialects today, versus the language evolution, while it also talks about the history, analyzing events in specific year versus their long-term impact. In science also, observing climate condition now versus climate changes over centuries. So in conclusion, for overall, synchronic versus diachronic is a two ways of understanding the world. So, both synchronic and diachronic analysis offer valuable perspective. One gives us a snapshot and other shows us progress over time. By using both, we can gain a deeper understanding of language, history, and culture. And that's all. The other pictures will be an example.
Good day everyone, I'm Eliza Matey Bukar, your 7th reporter. Today my report will focus on Pidgin and Creole languages. A Pidgin language is a simplified communication system that arises when speakers of different languages need to interact but lack of common tongue. It's characterized by a limited vocabulary, simplified grammar, and the fact that it's not anyone's native language. Example, two groups of people who don't speak of the same language. They need to communicate, so they start using a mix of words and grammar for both languages. That's called a Pidgin language. Now, if a Pidgin language is spoken by a whole generation of people, it becomes more complex and has its own grammar rules. This is what we call Creole language. So, a Creole language is like a Pidgin language that's grow up. When children start speaking a Pidgin language as their first language, it becomes more complex and organized. It develops its own grammar rules and vocabulary, becoming a full-fledged language in its own right. It's no longer just temporary communication tools. It's language with native speaker. To summarize, Pidgin and Creoles are fascinating example of how languages adapt and evolve to meet the needs of diverse communities. Let's end my report. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something about Pidgin and Creoles languages. Now let's move on to our next reporters. Presented by Ms. Teresa Santos, she will be discussing about macro and micro-linguistics.
Okay, so good day everyone. So I am Teresa Minchi Santos from Bsed English 1A. So we are in the group 2. So I will be discussing about what is micro-linguistics and macro-linguistics and what is the difference between the two. Okay, so let us first tackle about what is micro-linguistics. So micro-linguistics is a smaller scale. So it is the study of a language at a smaller or individual level. So this focuses on the details of how language works within a specific group, person, or a situation. So it looks at things like sounds for phonetics, words for morphology, sentence structure, which is the syntax, and the meaning, which is the semantics. So it's all about the tiny parts of a language that help us communicate. Okay, so examples of the microlinguistics looks at. So number one, we have the phonetics or the phonology. So studying how we pronounce sounds. For example, why do some people pronounce water as water and others as water? Okay. And the number two, or the second example we have here, is the syntax. So the rules about how sentences are put together. For example, why do we say I eat lunch but not lunch I eat? So that's it. That's how the syntax works. So number three, or number third example that we have here, as I mentioned, the morphology. So how words are formed. Okay, so for example, how unhappiness is made up of the prefix, which is the an, the root word, which is the happy, and the suffix is the ness, unhappiness. The last example for the microlinguistics is the semantics. So the study of meaning. For instance, understanding the difference in meaning between the words dog and the puppy. Okay, so that is the four examples of the microlinguistics, the part of the microlinguistics. Okay, so let's move on to the macrolinguistics, which is a bigger scale. Okay, so microlinguistics looks at language on a much larger scale. So it studies how languages and cultures interact over time and space. So rather than focusing on the tiny details of how we speak, so microlinguistics is about understanding language and society, how it changes across time, and how it's shaped by social, political, and historical factors. Okay, so there are subcategories of the macrolinguistics. So the first subcategories is the social linguistics. So it is for language and the society. So this is about how language works in different social situations. So it studies how people use language differently depending on things like where they live, their culture, age, or social status. So for example, how someone talks at home might be different from how they talk at school or work. So social linguistics helps us understand how language changes in different groups and communities. Okay, so another subcategory is the psycholinguistics. So it is a language and the psychology. So this branch looks at how our brain process and understand the language. So psycholinguistics study things like how we learn to speak, how we understand the sentences, and how our memory works when we try to recall the words. So for example, have you ever forgotten a word for a second but then suddenly remembered it? So psycholinguistics tries to explain why that happens. Okay, so the third subcategory is the neurolinguistics. So it is a language again and a neurology. So neurolinguistics is a bit like psycholinguistics, but it focuses more on how the brain itself is involved in a language. So it looks at how different parts of the brain helps us speak, understand, or even recover from language problem after a brain injury. So if someone has a stroke and can't talk anymore, neurolinguistics helps us figure out what part of the brain was affected. Okay, so the last subcategory is the computational linguistics, so language and the IT. So this field is about teaching computers how to understand and use language. So think about how Siri or Google Translate can understand what you're saying or translate between languages. So computational linguistics helps develop programs and systems that process language, making it easier for machines to talk to us and understand our words. So to sum it up, so in microlinguistics, you look at the word itself, how it is formed when people started using it, how it's pronounced, and how it fits in the grammar of English. In microlinguistics, you study how the word selfie became popular in global culture, how social media has influenced the spread of new words, and how the word might reflect a cultural shift in the way people view themselves and social interaction. So in microlinguistics, it's just all about the sentence or the structure of the sentence, the sounds that we have, how it is pronounced. But in microlinguistics, we are talking about how it spreads, how the new word spreads. Okay, it is a larger scale compared to the microlinguistics. Microlinguistics is just a small scale. Okay, so that
So here it ends my topic. So the next reporter will be Miss Cardinal. Okay. So thank you everyone for watching. So let's say.
Good morning, my name is Cornelina Escanimon from Bsed 1A, and today I'm going to tackle about the oral and written languages. Oral languages. Oral languages is often used by interacting, so you can formulate verbal interactions. And by doing that, we can be able to express our ideas, our emotions, feelings. On the other hand, the written languages is often used by writing or writing. I'm giving you examples. By writing an article, by writing a novel, and by writing, you can be able to express your feelings, your ideas, and